I close my eyes and take a trembling breath, knowing that the moment I reveal everything will shatter the fragile walls I've built around my conscience. I lied, I whisper, voice barely audible. I created a disorder that doesn't exist, just to manipulate the man who murdered my mother. The words hang heavy in the air, and I can feel my own pulse pounding in my ears, as if the confession itself is a weapon I've been wielding in secret, now turned against me. My hands clutch the edge of my desk as I stare into the dim light of the room, remembering every detail. The countless nights I spent designing that lie, meticulously weaving symptoms and symptoms that would trigger his paranoia. I remember the way I watched him from the shadows, observing how he reacted to my carefully planted clues, how his guilt grew like weeds choking his mind. I had thought I was in control, that my manipulations would bring justice, but now I see that I was spiraling into something far darker. He sat across from me, eyes darting, suspicious but desperate for answers. When I first suggested the disorder, I saw the flicker of hope in his gaze. I pressed him gently, feeding him my fabricated diagnosis, watching him clutch at the possibility of redemption. I remember the way he'd grip the chair's arms, trembling as I explained the symptoms: hallucinations, paranoia, auditory delusions, all carefully chosen to resonate with his own fragmented memories. "You don't understand," he muttered one day, voice cracking. "This is just in my head, right? I'm going crazy." I nodded solemnly, hiding the thrill that consumed me. "It's not your fault. It's the disorder. It's what's making you do these terrible things." I knew I'd nailed it when his eyes welled up, when his defenses crumbled. I'd created a monster, a mirror of his guilt and rage, and I'd made him believe it was an illness, a reason for his actions. But as I sit here now, the weight of what I've done presses down on my chest like a prison. I never intended for this to spiral so far out of control. I told myself I was only trying to find the truth, to get to the core of his madness. But somewhere along the way I lost my moral compass. I manipulated his mind, yes, deliberately, maliciously. I painted that false picture, so he'd see himself as a victim of an invisible illness, which left room for him to be the perpetrator and the victim simultaneously. In those sessions, I watched him unravel, each session peeling back another layer of his psyche. I planted doubts about his memories, about what he truly knew. I told him that the disorder was the reason he'd lost control, that his violent urges weren't his fault, but symptoms of a hidden illness. When he asked me if he could ever be free of it, I hesitated, a flicker of guilt passing through me, quickly suppressed. Now, as I confess, I realize I have become the architect of his torment. I crafted the disorder to keep him on a leash, to make him doubt himself. I saw how he clung to the idea that he was sick, that his actions were triggered by some unseen force. With every lie I told, I fed that illusion. I watched as he descended into a labyrinth of paranoia, and I reveled in the illusion of control. But in the quiet aftermath of my confession, I wonder, what have I truly done? Was I a healer, or just another thief in the dark? I played God with his mind, and now I stand here trembling, knowing I have crossed a line from which there is no return. I created chaos not just in his life, but in my own, and as I meet his stunned gaze, I realize I have become something far worse than I ever anticipated, a manipulator wielding truth as a weapon, and a victim of my own deadly design. That sleepless night haunts me more than I care to admit. I lie awake, staring at the scarred surface of the wall, searching for some semblance of clarity amid the chaos I've wrought. The faint scratches, the faint discolorations, each mark a silent witness to my descent into madness. I trace the patterns with my eyes, as if by understanding them I can justify my actions, or perhaps find redemption in some hidden meaning. I remember the exact moment the idea took root. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, insidious whisper that grew louder with each passing day. I was sitting in my dimly lit office, the clock ticking monotonously, echoing my growing unease. I had been listening to her, watching her tremble, and I saw how her mind was fraying at the edges. That was when I wondered, what if I could manipulate her just enough to make her see what I wanted her to see? What if I crafted a disease, a fragile, invisible illness that no one else could verify? It would be a tool, a way to control her, to keep her tethered to me. To the narrative I spun, I recall the initial thrill, the feeling of power in my fingertips as I devised the symptoms, the timelines, the subtle clues that would convince her of her own madness. I poured hours into it, carefully selecting the details, making sure they aligned with her existing fears, her past traumas. The more I added, the more real it became in my mind. I convinced myself it was for her own good, a means to help her confront her demons, but deep down I knew I was playing gods with her fragile psyche. On that night, I sat there staring at the peeling paint, my fingers nervously tracing the cracks in the wall, contemplating whether I was crossing a line or simply pushing her toward salvation. My mind spun with justification. Perhaps this was necessary. Perhaps a little chaos was the price for clarity. I convinced myself that by creating this illness, I was giving her a gift, the opportunity to confront her truth, even if that truth was a lie. Yet, as I observed the scars on the wall, I realized how my mind was unraveling. The lines between reality and illusion blurred. I began to see my own reflection warped in her suffering. I thought I was the healer, the guide through her darkness, but in truth I had become something far darker, an architect of her suffering, a manipulator cloaked in the guise of concern. The power I wielded was intoxicating and terrifying, a double-edged sword that cut both ways. In that solitary night, I wrestled with the weight of my choices. The guilt was buried beneath layers of justification, but it seeped through, insidiously gnawing at my consciousness. I had created a fragile artificial world, a maze that she now wandered blindly, searching for meaning, for truth, when there was only the echo of my lies. I crafted her illness, but I also created my own prison, a labyrinth of regret and shame from which there is no escape. As dawn approached, I looked again at the wall, at the scratches and the faded stains. I wondered if she saw the same patterns I did, if she sensed the careful choreography behind her suffering, or perhaps in her quiet despair, she had already begun to see through the illusion I had spun. In that moment, I knew I was no longer the healer I once believed myself to be. I had become a manipulator, a creator of chaos, and in doing so I had lost a piece of my soul. The thought terrifies me. What kind of man am I to play God and watch others suffer for my own twisted sense of control? The darkness within me grows deeper with each passing night, and I wonder if I will ever be able to undo what I have done, or if I am forever condemned to dwell in the shadows of my own making. I sit alone in the quiet, flickering glow of my desk lamp, my fingers trembling slightly as I leaf through the aged, yellowed pages of my notebooks. Each page is meticulously filled with notes, observations, and the detailed description of a syndrome I once invented, a disorder that was entirely my creation. The words stare back at me, cold and unyielding, a testament to my own moral disintegration. A strange mixture of shame and relief floods over me as I read. Shame for what I did, the manipulation, the deception. Relief because I now have a plan, a blueprint to control the chaos I helped to exacerbate. I remember the night I first conceived of the disorder. It wasn't born out of genuine concern, nor from a sincere desire to help her. No, it was crafted in a moment of sheer impulsiveness, a reckless attempt to impose order on her fractured mind. I had studied her carefully, reading her every tremor, every slip of her voice. I knew her vulnerabilities, her fragile state, and I saw an opportunity, a power I couldn't resist. I painted a picture of a psychological disorder that fit her symptoms perfectly, a diagnosis so specific and convincing that she accepted it almost immediately. It was a lie, spun with such precision that I convinced myself it was necessary. I remember the first time I explained it to her, a tangled web of pseudo-scientific jargon, subtle cues in my tone. The way I suggested her symptoms were part of something bigger than herself, her eyes wide and searching, blanked with understanding or perhaps confusion. It didn't matter. I was the one in control now. I watched her attempt to understand, to reconcile her experience with the fabricated diagnosis I provided. I saw her cling to my words like a lifeline, and I felt a surge of power, an intoxicating, dangerous feeling I struggled to resist. As I flipped through the pages, I realized how detailed I got. I documented her supposed symptoms, the fluctuations in her mood, the minute changes in her behavior. Every detail was carefully crafted, an elaborate diagram of her supposed disorder. I even added symptoms that she hadn't exhibited, but that I knew would resonate with her, deepen her belief that she was ill, that she was beyond repair. It was all an illusion, a house of cards I built with my own hands, yet it seemed real in that moment, real enough to hold her captive in her own mind. In that process, I felt a strange sense of relief, a fleeting reassurance that I had a plan. When I looked at those notes, I could almost believe I was doing something good, something that might make her better. But deep down I knew it was all a lie. I created her suffering just as much as I tried to diagnose it. And yet, that lie was all I had to hold on to. It was my shield, my weapon. I told myself that I was giving her a reason to fight, that I was providing her with a diagnosis she could understand, even if it was false. I also understand now how easily I blurred the lines between healer and manipulator. The act of inventing a disorder, an entirely fictitious syndrome, was a pivot point. It was an act of control cloaked in the guise of concern. I convinced myself that I was guiding her, that I was helping her grasp her own darkness so she could face it. But all along I was the one pulling the strings, setting the stage for her unraveling. I became the architect of her descent into chaos, and I felt the power that came with that realization. The absurdity of it all hits me hard. I, a supposed professional, fabricated a disorder from thin air. No one ever questioned me, because I was convincing, because I knew exactly how to spin the story. I kept detailed notes. I crafted a convincing narrative, and I watched her believe in her own illness. And with each passing day, I manipulated her perception, steadily eroding her sense of reality. Now, as I pore over those notes again, I sense a strange, bitter satisfaction. For the first time in a long while, I have a plan. I know the steps I must take to undo some of this damage, to correct the course I set in motion. The guilt still gnaws at me, but I recognize the necessity of this deception. It has become my secret weapon, a tool I can wield to steer her towards recovery, to give her a glimmer of hope, even if it's built on a lie. I wonder if she ever suspected the truth. If a part of her ever sensed that her diagnosis was constructed, a story I spun to manipulate her. Perhaps she saw through it, but was too exhausted to confront me. Or perhaps she still clings to the belief that her suffering is genuine, that her mind is irrevocably broken. I can't tell anymore. All I know is that I hold the power now, and I am determined to use it responsibly, or at least as responsibly as I am capable of. I close the notebook gently, my fingers lingering on the cover. A new resolve begins to form within me. I will fix what I have broken, at least in part. I will find the right words, the right actions to steer her back from the brink. But I can't help feeling the weight of my own darkness pressing down on me. A reminder that I am no longer merely a healer. I am something far darker, a creator of shadows I may never fully escape. As Marcus sat across from me, his eyes fixed intently on my face, I could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. I had meticulously crafted the story of the disorder, weaving it into the fabric of his consciousness. And now, watching him absorb it, I was both fascinated and deeply disturbed by my own creation. I had, in essence, spun a web of lies so convincing that even he, the perceptive one, seemed utterly captivated. His smile, the slight enigmatic upturn of his lips, told me he was buying into it wholeheartedly. I watched as he nodded slowly, as if confirming an unspoken understanding. I wanted to believe he saw through the veneer, that somewhere beneath that composed exterior, a flicker of suspicion shimmered, but no. Instead, he leaned back comfortably, as if accepting the diagnosis I had fabricated with deliberate care. My heart pounded with a strange thrill. This was the pinnacle of my manipulation, the moment when the line between truth and fiction blurred beyond recognition. It was intoxicating to realize that my words could shape his perception of her suffering. I had spun a delicate narrative, one that tethered her illness to a fabricated disorder, and in doing so, I had forged a new reality, one where her pain was rooted in something concrete, something I could control. I saw myself in that moment not just as a healer, but as an architect of illusions, a master of perception. The smile on Marcus's face lingered, and I wondered if he sensed something beneath the surface, if he questioned the veracity of the story I told. Yet he remained silent, accepting the lie without hesitation. That silence was more telling than any words. It was an acknowledgement of my power, a silent agreement to the narrative I created. My gaze flickered to his eyes, searching for a trace of doubt, but I found only unwavering trust, or perhaps a mask hiding his own doubts. In the quiet that followed, I felt the darkness inside me stir. The act of deception was addicting. It had unlocked a profound control I hadn't fully appreciated before. I had become both the healer and the manipulator, a duality that gnawed at the edges of my conscience. My mind raced with the possibilities, how I could reinforce this illusion, how I might deepen her belief, guiding her toward a fragile hope rooted in my carefully constructed lies. Yet, beneath that surge of power, a lingering shadow of guilt crept in. I was playing with fire, twisting her reality, and I knew the danger of it, how easily the web could unravel, leaving us both exposed. But right now I chose to ignore the peril, reveling in the control I held. As Marcus sat there smiling enigmatically, I felt a strange sense of fulfillment. I had unlocked a secret I didn't fully understand myself, an ability to manipulate perceptions at will. The truth had become a malleable thing, something I could shape, distort, and obscure at my whim. And within that darkness, I found a perverse kind of satisfaction, a sense that I was wielding an unprecedented power. I wondered if she suspected anything, if, at some unconscious level, she felt the threads of her own mind slipping into a labyrinth of my making. Perhaps she had always known, or maybe she was too exhausted to resist anymore. Either way, I was the puppeteer now, and I intended to keep pulling the strings at least for a while longer. The session ended, and I watched Marcus leave, the door closing softly behind him. The room grew silent again, but inside me a storm was brewing, an intoxicating mix of guilt, pride, and a dark, obsessive desire to fix what I had set in motion. I knew I had created a monster, and I couldn't tell whether I was the healer who helped or the villain who lied. All I knew was that I had crossed a line, and I was eager to see how far I could go before it all shattered. In the dim glow of my office, I scribble furiously in my journal, trying to untangle the chaos that now threatens to consume me. The lines between my creation and reality blur with each word I write. I never set out to manipulate her so completely. Yet I can't deny the intoxicating rush I felt when I fabricated that disorder, the one I dubbed the Silent Shadow. It was a mere fiction, a construct born from my desire to understand her, to control her unraveling mind. But somewhere along the way, that fiction took on a life of its own, slipping past my intentions, becoming an uncontrollable entity I can no longer tame. I remember the moment vividly, the spark of exhilaration that shot through me as I watched her internal world fracture and realign around the lie. Her eyes, once filled with quiet desperation, now held an emptiness that I had expertly woven into her consciousness. I saw her struggle with the phantom symptoms I had so carefully engineered, the subtle tremors, the inexplicable silences that crept up her spine, the fleeting moments of disorientation that I had planted like seeds in her subconscious. It was a delicate dance of suggestion, one I believed I could master forever. But the pieces are shifting now. The web I spun is fraying, revealing glimpses of truth I hadn't anticipated. Marcus's unpredictability is the catalyst I had secretly hoped would happen, but now fear. His behavior has become erratic, unpredictable in ways I hadn't foreseen. He questions more, doubts everything I say, and I can see the flicker of suspicion ignite behind his eyes. I've always known that this game could backfire, that the line I crossed might eventually snap under the weight of my own lies. Yet I can't resist the thrill of pushing further, of testing the limits of my influence. When I created that disorder, I felt a surge of power, a fleeting godhood that made me believe I could manipulate perceptions as easily as I breathe. I convinced myself that I was shielding her from the chaos, guiding her through the darkness. But now I realize I was only feeding the chaos itself. The more I try to control, the more I feel the chaos creeping in, slipping through the cracks of my carefully constructed illusions. Her behavior is less predictable with each passing day. She's starting to question things I thought were firmly sealed inside her mind. The subtle signs, those tiny deviations, those fleeting expressions, are no longer entirely under my control. I catch myself wondering, have I overstepped? Did I ever have a choice? Or was I always destined to lose myself in this labyrinth of lies that I so masterfully crafted? I watch her, aware of the nuances, the faint tremors in her voice, the way her eyes dart when I mention certain topics. It's as if the walls I built are crumbling, exposing the fragile core beneath. Sometimes I convince myself that I'm still the healer, even if that healer wears the mask of a manipulator. After all, I only wanted to help her, to give her relief, to save her from her torment. But what kind of salvation involves creating a lie so convincing that even I sometimes forget what is true? The guilt gnaws at me, yet it's drowned out by the hunger for control, the desire to steer this ship through the storm I've unleashed. I can't help but wonder if this is my true nature, a creator of illusions, a craftsman of fractured realities, lost in the maze I've built. Tonight, I feel the weight of it all pressing down harder. The journal's pages fill with frantic scrawls, snippets of realizations and fears. I ask myself if I can stop this descent before it spirals completely out of hand. Or have I already crossed a point of no return? Marcus's unpredictable actions echo in my mind, each one a reminder that my carefully laid plans are unraveling faster than I anticipated. I am both the architect and the prisoner of my own design. The more I try to fix what I've broken, the more entangled I become in the web of lies I spun. I cling to the hope that I can regain control, that I can somehow steer this chaos back into order. But deep down, I know that I have created a monster that might be beyond my ability to contain. In the silence that follows my frantic writing, I feel the shifting tide within me, fear mingling with a dark exhilaration. Is this what I sought all along? The power to shape reality itself, even if it means losing my own sense of truth. I fear that I am no longer the healer I thought I was. Instead, I am something far more dangerous, a manipulator who has crafted a labyrinth from her fractured mind, and now I am lost within it. The only certainty I cling to is that I must keep writing, keep controlling, keep lying, even if it means sacrificing my own conscience, because I know that once I step back from this edge, there's no returning. And yet a whisper inside me warns that I have already gone too far, that my creation is no longer mine to command. And still I write. I never intended to deceive her, at least not in the way it turned out. The moment I fabricated that non-existent disorder, a strange new surge of power coursed through me. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. I remember standing in my dimly lit office, the only sound the faint scribbling of my notes, as I watched her reactions unfold like a slow-motion nightmare. The way her eyes flickered, searching for understanding, then slowly slipping into a fog of confusion. That was when I knew I'd crossed a line. And yet, I told myself it was necessary, a tool to unlock the secrets buried beneath her fractured psyche. But as days slipped into nights, the illusion grew more fragile. I became reckless, feeding her lies with a confidence I couldn't quite explain. I convinced myself that I was helping, that this new disorder was a key to unlocking her truth. Still, deep down I sensed that I was playing with fire, that I was manipulating something far more delicate than I could comprehend. Every word I uttered was a thread, woven into the complex tapestry of her unraveling mind, and I felt the power shift in my favor, fueling a dangerous obsession I refused to acknowledge. Then came the morning that changed everything. I arrived early, eager, expecting to find her struggling with her new diagnosis, perhaps questioning her own sanity. Instead, I saw him, Marcus, smiling in a way that froze my blood. His expression was twisted, a sinister grin stretching across his face as he mentioned the new disease I had created. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a furious reminder that he had discovered my manipulation. That sneer on his face, part amusement, part menace, crystallized the horrifying truth he knew. In that moment I felt my stomach drop. The illusion I had carefully crafted, the control I had thought I possessed, was crumbling like dried plaster. It was as if Marcus's smile was a dagger, piercing through the fragile veneer of my carefully constructed lie. The realization hit me with brutal clarity. Marcus had uncovered my secret. My stomach clenched and my mind raced to find a solution, to somehow cover my tracks. But I was paralyzed by shock. How could I have been so careless? The weight of my deception pressed down on me with relentless force. I looked into Marcus's eyes and saw a flicker of something darker. Approval. Mockery. Either way, I knew I had lost the upper hand. The power I had felt, the control over her mind, over the narrative, was merely an illusion. He had seen through the act, and suddenly everything felt exposed, fragile as glass ready to shatter. My hands trembled as I tried to maintain composure, but my mind was racing, desperately searching for a way to salvage what I could. The worst part was the silence that settled afterward, thick and suffocating. Marcus's smile lingered just beneath his lips, as if savoring his victory. I felt the walls closing in, the web I had spun tightening around me. I wanted to deny, to justify, to pretend that I was still in control. But the truth was indisputable. I had created a monster, and now it was loose. My own deception had turned against me, revealing truths I had desperately tried to hide. As I forced myself to meet his eyes, I felt the chilling realization that I was no longer the healer. No, I had become something far more insidious. I had crafted this elaborate lie to manipulate, to control, and in doing so I had lost my own moral compass. That morning marked a turning point. I knew I had to act, to cover my tracks, to rewrite the narrative once more. Yet something told me that I was no longer the author of this story. The handwriting was no longer in my control. In the quiet that followed Marcus's smile, I felt a shiver run down my spine. My mind was racing, my thoughts tangled with fear and guilt, but also with a dark thrill. I had pushed past the boundaries of ethics and sanity, and yet I couldn't stop. Now that he knew, everything had changed. I could feel the fragile edges of my carefully constructed world fracturing, and I wondered how long I could hold it together before it all collapsed. The deception had begun to win, and I was powerless to stop it. I could only watch as my carefully laid plans unraveled, one thread at a time. The line between truth and lie blurred irreparably, and I realized with dread that I had created something far beyond my control. I had become both the architect and the prisoner of my own manipulation, and I feared that I was destined to be consumed by it. And still, I write. I took a deep, trembling breath as Marcus's piercing gaze bore into me, his expression a complex mixture of suspicion and challenge. The room was thick with tension, every second stretching painfully long. I knew I couldn't let him see the chaos swirling inside me, my trembling hands, the faint sheen of sweat on my brow, the way my voice wavered just slightly. I forced a calm I did not feel, a mask I had perfected over countless sessions. "Everything we've discussed," I began, voice steady as I could manage, "is part of your treatment. You're making progress. We're working through this together." My mind screamed at me, begging to break free from the script I had crafted, but I clenched my jaw instead. Keep the facade. Keep him believing. If I faltered now, the entire fragile illusion I'd built would shatter into irreparable pieces. My body betrayed my nerves, though. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, trembling almost imperceptibly. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, sharp and relentless. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears like a warning bell, reminding me of how close I was to losing control. Yet I had to act as if everything was perfectly normal, as if this confrontation was just another step in the process, another part of the treatment. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You're not convincing me anymore. I see through you." His words hit me like a punch, but I refused to let them show. Instead, I forced a half smile, the kind I'd practiced countless times, calculated, controlled, but hollow. I knew I was on the verge of a breakdown, that my entire carefully maintained facade was teetering on the brink. Still, I kept talking, weaving my words, trying to convince him and myself that everything was under control, that this was all part of the plan. I had created this lie, this elaborate web of deception to manipulate him, yes, but also to contain the chaos that threatened to consume me. To hold him hostage in my manufactured reality, to keep my secrets hidden just a little longer. Now faced with his suspicion, I felt that delicate fabric strain and rip at the edges. My mind spun with desperate calculations. How much longer could I sustain this? How much of myself was I willing to sacrifice for this facade? The line between truth and lie blurred more with each passing second, and I sensed the darkness in me creeping closer, eager to swallow what little remains of my integrity. I clenched my jaw tighter, trying to summon a sense of authority, a semblance of calm. "Marcus, I understand you're upset. This is part of the process. It's necessary to explore." He cut me off, voice sharper, more accusatory. "No, this isn't part of the treatment. This is manipulation. You're hiding something." I can feel it, the words struck like a blow. My heartbeat quickened, a primal instinct to defend myself surging forth. I wanted to tell him everything. everything I'd hidden, every lie I'd spun, but the fear of unraveling my entire constructed universe held me back. Instead, I nodded slowly, as if conceding, as if surrendering to his suspicion. In that moment, I realized I was no longer just the healer. I had become the creator of a monster that now threatened to devour me whole. The deception I had spun so meticulously was slipping through my fingers, unraveling around me like a shroud. Perhaps Marcus sensed it too, that I was teetering on the edge of collapse, that my carefully crafted mask was cracking, revealing a fragment of the chaos beneath. I forced myself to stand straighter, to appear unwavering, even as my stomach twisted with dread. Every muscle in my body screamed to flee, to confess everything, to confess that I'd fabricated a disorder, that I'd lied to manipulate, to control, that I'd created an illusion of help to hide my own desperation. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not here. Instead, I pushed my trembling voice into a semblance of calm. "You're mistaken," I said softly, almost whispering. "This is all part of the process. Trust me." As I spoke, I felt the weight of my own words, hollow and fragile. I knew I was lying, desperately, hopelessly lying, to buy just a little more time. Because the truth was that I had created a monster, and now in this moment I was helpless to contain it. The darkness, once confined to the shadows of my mind, now threatened to burst forth, and I wondered, how much longer could I keep hiding from what I had become? As I sit in the dim glow of my office, immersed in the cold flicker of the screen, I can't help but replay the recordings of our sessions over and over. Each playback feels like peeling back layers of a skin I once thought was mine. Revealing, disturbing, revealing more than I ever intended. My own voice echoes back at me, sometimes gentle, sometimes taunting, and each time I listen I become acutely aware of the creeping web of manipulation I spun. I never set out to deceive her, truly. It was an impulse, a desperate attempt to grasp control over a chaos I couldn't contain. When I created that disorder, this phantom illness, I felt a surge, a strange kind of euphoria. It was as if the act of fabricating a vulnerability granted me a newfound authority, a way to steer her fragile mind. I convinced myself that I was guiding her toward healing, but as I hear my words now, I realize how deeply I was entangling myself in a web of my own making. The recordings are haunting. Her voice, so raw, so broken, begs for answers, and I see myself in her. Not as the healer I so desperately want to be, but as the architect of her suffering. I notice the subtle shifts in my tone, the calculated pauses, the way I steer her thoughts, planting seeds of doubt of herself and her perceptions. I was always aware, even then, of how powerful words could be. I just underestimated how easily I could wield them like a double-edged sword. Yet with each playback, I start to feel the trap closing in. The once clear lines between my intentions and my actions blur into a murky fog. I see the extent of my own deception, the way I exaggerated symptoms, suggested treatments that weren't necessary, all to keep her tethered to my narrative. I told her she was fragile, that her mind was fragile, and in doing so I cemented that fragility in her. I convinced myself that it was for her benefit, but the truth is I was feeding my own darkness, nurturing a monster that now threatens to consume us both. What began as an act of supposed healing has morphed into something sinister. The more I manipulate, the more I realize I'm trapped in a maze of my own creation. I can't escape without facing the chaos I unleashed, yet every attempt to confront my actions feels like sinking deeper into quicksand. The recordings mock me. They are evidence of my own betrayal, of my ethics, my integrity, perhaps even my sanity. I wonder how much longer I can maintain this facade. My reflection in the screen shows a person I no longer recognize, an imposter hiding behind the guise of a healer. The carefully constructed persona I wore is cracking, revealing a fractured, darker core. I am both the puppet master and the puppet, caught in a twisted dance I no longer control. Sometimes I think about erasing these recordings, wiping away the proof of my deception, but a part of me resists. I need to watch, to listen, to understand exactly how far I've fallen. It's as if every moment I relive exposes a new layer of my own guilt, a deeper acknowledgement of how I used her pain to feed my own craving for power. I see how I projected my fears onto her, how I wove my own nightmares into her fragile psyche, And yet, amidst this self-revelation, a cold realization takes hold. I am no longer just her healer. Somewhere along the line, I became the architect of her suffering, the creator of her torment. The darkness I tried to suppress has become a part of me, seeping into every word, every lie, every manipulation. I see now that I have become what I once feared, an instrument of chaos, a master of illusion. I wonder if she ever senses it. The subtle shifts in my tone, the pauses that linger just a second too long, the way my eyes flicker when I lie, these are the moments she must feel in her bones. I know I do in my hollow conscience, in the pit of my stomach that refuses to settle. The guilt is a living thing, gnawing at my insides, threatening to spill over at any moment. But I am trapped in the twisted labyrinth I designed myself, with no clear way out. My only hope is that someday I can confront this darkness honestly, that I can dismantle the monster I've become before it devours everything. Her, myself, the very integrity of the person I thought I was. Until then, I'll keep watching these recordings, listening to my own voice, dissecting every word, every lie, because in them I see the reflection of my own undoing, a reminder that every manipulation, every fabrication has a cost. And I fear more than anything that I may have already paid too much. The memory crashes into me with brutal force, unbidden and relentless. I see her face, the cold, lifeless expression of my mother, the blood pooling on the cold kitchen floor, her eyes staring into nothingness. I remember the way my hands trembled that night, the chaos in my mind spiraling out of control as I fought to understand what I had just witnessed. It's as if that moment locked itself into my bones, searing itself into my subconscious, shaping every thought I've had since. I had always been obsessed with understanding evil, with peeling back the layers of darkness that seemed to lurk beneath the surface of every human soul. That obsession drove me to become the psychologist I am today, but it also led me to the edge of madness. I recall the nights I spent poring over case studies, trying to find some pattern, some key to unlock the mystery of the darkness that claimed my mother's life. And in my desperation, I devised a plan, an elaborate dance of deception designed to manipulate the very fabric of a killer's mind. That night, I concocted a story, an invisible illness, a disorder that didn't exist, but which I fabricated with meticulous care. I remember how I crafted the symptoms, the subtle clues I planted to make him believe in its reality. I told myself I was seeking the truth, that I was unearthing the root of evil. But deep down I knew I was just feeding my own obsession, my need to control the chaos, to turn the chaos into something tangible I could grasp. My hands trembled as I created the diagnosis, a delicate web of lies spun with the precision of a master manipulator. I saw the moment the illusion took hold, his eyes flickering with uncertainty, his voice hesitating as he tried to grasp the concept I'd seeded in his mind. That sick thrill, that rush of power, knowing I held the strings, that I could shape his reality with just words, was intoxicating. I convinced myself it was for his own good, that understanding the darkness would lead to salvation. But in truth I was feeding my own dark hunger, fueling the fires of my obsession. And then the night fell. I was alone in my office, the sterile glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. I replayed the scene over and over, trying to decipher the cracks in my own deception, wondering if I'd gone too far. I felt the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. This wasn't healing. It was control. It was domination cloaked in the guise of understanding. I told myself that this was necessary, that the truth was too dangerous to confront directly. So I built a wall of lies, a fortress of falsehoods I believed could shield me from the chaos I so desperately sought to tame. But that night, as I sat in my silent office, I realized I was no longer just a healer. My creation had become the monster I feared. I had become the architect of a new chaos, one I couldn't easily escape. Each lie I told, each illusion I wove, was like adding another brick to a prison I was unknowingly building around myself. The very tools I thought would save me, my mind, my cunning, had become my chains. I remember the moment I first felt the full weight of my guilt, the haunting sensation that I was losing myself in the labyrinth I had built. My obsession with understanding evil had twisted into something much darker. I was no longer just seeking answers. I was crafting demons, puppeteering minds with my fabricated truths. The boundary between healer and manipulator blurred to the point of no return. Now every time I watch those recordings, listen to my own voice dissecting every word, I see the reflection of my own undoing. The innocent intentions I once held have been tainted, corrupted by my obsession and my manipulations. I fear the damage is irreversible, that I may have already paid the highest price, my own soul. I cling to the hope that someday I can confront this darkness honestly, dismantle the fortress of lies I've built, and find a way back to some semblance of integrity. But for now I remain trapped, haunted by the memory of that night, the night I crossed a line from which there is no return, when my desire to understand the evil led me to create it. In the dim light of my office, shadows dancing across the walls, I sit alone with my thoughts spiraling into chaos. The weight of what I have done presses heavily on my chest, yet I can't deny the strange thrill that came with creating that fabricated disorder, that non-existent disease I told Marcus he suffered from. I convinced myself it was a necessary lie, a tool to restrain his destructive impulses, to keep him tethered to a semblance of control. But as the hours stretch on, I realize that the illusion I crafted is slipping through my fingers, unraveling with each passing second. I remember how it felt, an intoxicating rush, like I had wielded some arcane power over his fractured psyche. The moment I dubbed his symptoms, assigned his diagnosis, I sensed an undeniable surge of authority. I believed that by defining his chaos I could tame it, by naming his pain I could contain it. But now that sense of mastery is crumbling. It's as if my creation, once a lifeline, has turned into a noose tightening around me. I see the cracks in the illusion widening, the fragile veneer of control dissolving into thin air. My mind races, back to the countless sessions, the subtle shifts in his behavior, the way he clung to every word I uttered. I had woven a fiction so convincing that he accepted it without question, and in doing so I believed I was guiding him toward recovery. Yet each lie I told built a labyrinth I can no longer navigate. The more I manipulated, the deeper I fell into my own trap. It was a dangerous dance, dancing with the truth I refused to face and hiding behind the false stability I had manufactured. Sometimes I catch myself questioning whether I am still a healer or simply a puppeteer cloaked in a white coat. The boundary has blurred until I can no longer distinguish where my intentions end and my deception begins. I crafted that disorder, yes, but in doing so I also created a prison for myself. The walls are closing in and I feel myself slipping beneath the surface of my own deception. The sensation of losing control is visceral. It's like watching a carefully constructed house of cards start to wobble and fall, one by one. My grip on the narrative I told Marcus is weakening, and with it the illusion that I am still the one in charge. The truth is, I am no longer sure who I am, healer, manipulator, or something far darker. My own creation has turned against me, echoing every lie, amplifying every doubt. I reflect on that night, the night everything changed. I had believed that controlling Marcus meant controlling the chaos, shaping his mind into a manageable form. But instead, I had engineered chaos of my own making. And now, as I gaze into the depths of my own conscience, I realize that my control was always an illusion, a delicate veneer that cracked long ago. The more I tried to hold on to it, the more I lost myself. A part of me screams to admit the truth, to dismantle this house of lies and face the consequences of my actions. I want to destroy the false narrative I built around him, to confront the darkness I helped conjure. Yet fear keeps me rooted, silent in the shadows. The repercussions are too terrifying to face. What if I am beyond redemption? What if this deception has forever tainted my soul? In these quiet, solitary moments, I grapple with my own reflection. I see a man who has crossed a line, who has played God with a fragile life. I crafted an illusion with the hope of control, but only succeeded in unleashing chaos, something far more destructive than I ever anticipated. I fear that the damage I've inflicted is irreversible, that I've become a prisoner of my own lies. As I sit here, I cling to the faint hope that someday I might unravel the web I've spun, confront my own monstrosity, and find some sliver of redemption. But for now, I am trapped in this self-made labyrinth, haunted by the ghosts of my creation. The guilt gnaws at me, relentless and unforgiving, whispering that I was never meant to be the architect of such darkness. And yet, I must face it. I am the creator of my own undoing, and perhaps the architect of something far worse than I ever imagined. As Marcus leans forward, voice trembling with an almost desperate edge, I feel the familiar rush of adrenaline. His words hang in the air, heavy with accusation, threatening to shatter the fragile illusion I've so carefully maintained. My mind races, every nerve ending screaming, yet I must stay composed, mask the turmoil roiling inside me. I clench my fists, feeling the sweat bead beneath my palms. The truth, my secret, the lie I nurtured, teeters on the edge of exposure. I've crafted a facade so convincing that even I have convinced myself it's real. But now Marcus's threat to reveal everything threatens to undo that carefully constructed house of cards. That's when I realize I need to act, to do something, anything, to preserve what's left of my reputation and sanity. In that split second, my mind conjures a desperate plan. I lean in slightly, lowering my voice into a whisper that's almost hypnotic. "Marcus," I say, voice steady despite the chaos inside. "You don't understand what's at stake. Revealing that disorder, that fabricated illness, would do more than just ruin me. It would destroy everything we've built, everything I've dedicated my life to." His eyes narrow, suspicion flickering, but I press on, my words slicing through the tension. "You see, that disorder, constructed, yes, was a tool, a way to understand, to manipulate certain behaviors. It wasn't real, but it was effective. It allowed me to guide her, to help her find her footing amidst the chaos." I pause, carefully choosing my next words. "If you expose this, you'll unravel years of hard work, years of my effort to make sense of her suffering. Do you want to be responsible for that?" My voice gains a faint edge of desperation, a calculated move to sway him. I know I must evoke enough doubt to buy myself time, or even better, to turn him away from his threat altogether. "You have to understand, Marcus," I continue. "Sometimes the truth isn't as clear-cut as it appears. Sometimes a lie is necessary, an illusion we wear like armor, to protect what's fragile. I did what I thought was best." He hesitates, and I see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. That's when I seize the moment, my mind racing to spin an even more elaborate web of deception. I lean back slightly, adopting a tone of calm reassurance that I barely recognize as my own. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. If you reveal this, you'll only cause pain, chaos. Nothing good comes from exposing the truth. Trust me, I've seen what happens when secrets surface. It's a destructive force. I only ask you to consider the bigger picture. Inside, I'm acutely aware of how close I am to the edge. Every word is a fragile thread, every gesture a calculated move to preserve my own stability. I feel the weight of my own guilt pressing down, threatening to crush me beneath its relentless pressure. But I push forward, maintaining a veneer of confidence even as my mind screams for escape. As Marcus begins to respond, I realize I've woven a complex lie, one that's become as much a part of me as the air I breathe. The deception was never about malicious intent. It was about control, about trying to tame the chaos that once threatened to consume everything. Now that lie has taken on a life of its own, and I'm just a shadow puppeteer desperately trying to keep the strings from snapping. I know in my core that if he pushes further, my carefully constructed illusion will shatter, revealing a truth far darker than any lie I've told. And yet I cling to hope. Hope that I can steer this storm away, that I can outmaneuver him, that I can buy just enough time to figure out my next move. Because deep inside, I understand that this moment, this confrontation, is not just about the lie. It's about facing the monster I've created, within myself and in the world I've tried so hard to control. That night, I sat in the dim glow of my office, the air thick with unspoken tension. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, but now with her sitting across from me, vulnerable and expectant, the words felt heavier than I had anticipated. My hands trembled slightly as I prepared to unmask the truth I'd so carefully hidden, knowing that once I spoke, everything could change. perhaps forever. I took a deep breath and looked into her eyes, which shimmered with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "Something I've kept concealed because I believed it was necessary, but I realize now that hiding it has only caused more damage." I hesitated, feeling the weight of my own words pressing down on my chest before finally forcing them out. "The disorder I told you I created, it was never real." Her eyes widened in confusion, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. I could see her mind racing, trying to process what I'd just admitted. I pressed on, compelled to reveal everything, to purge the dark secret that had haunted me for so long. I fabricated the diagnosis because I thought it would give me control over her, over the chaos she was trapped in, and perhaps over my own fears. I convinced myself that if I could make her believe she was ill, I could help her find stability. But in truth, I was trying to manipulate her, to bend her to my will without her realizing it. I saw her flinch, and I knew I had pushed her into uncomfortable territory. My voice softened, almost pleading. It wasn't about deception for the sake of deception. I convinced myself I was doing what was best, protecting her, saving her from the destruction I saw lurking beneath her fragile surface. But I see now how monstrous that was, how I used my knowledge, my authority, to craft this illusion, to create a monster out of nothing. I paused, allowing the silence to stretch between us. I was lost in a maze of my own making, a labyrinth of lies I thought would keep chaos at bay. Instead, it only fed the darkness. I noticed her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and I felt a flicker of shame, an emotion I had long suppressed. My mind raced, contemplating the fallout, fearing her rejection, her anger, perhaps even her despair. But I knew I had to be honest, no matter the consequences. "I want you to understand that I never intended to deceive you maliciously. My actions stemmed from a place of fear, fear of losing control, of facing the uncontrollable chaos within myself. But now I realize that this honesty is the only way forward." My voice cracked slightly as I continued. "I created the disorder because I was scared, scared of what I might find if I looked too deeply into myself. It was easier to fabricate a diagnosis than to confront my own darkness, and in doing so, I became both the healer and the manipulator. I played with fire and I burned bridges I never thought I would cross." I looked away briefly, ashamed of the man I had become. "But tonight, I want to step out from behind that mask, to face the truth, my truth, and hope that somehow you can forgive me." The room grew still, and I could feel her trembling as she absorbed my confession. I wondered if she would see me as a villain or a victim of my own twisted mind. I had built walls around myself, convinced that I was doing what was necessary, but now I saw how hollow that reasoning was. I had created a monster, one that threatened to consume everything I cared about. As I sat there, vulnerable and exposed, I understood that this was a turning point. The moment I would either be consumed by the darkness I had summoned, or find a way to escape it. I felt the weight of my sins pressing down, yet also a flicker of hope. Hope that honesty might be the first step toward redemption. I had no illusions that this revelation would undo all the harm I'd caused, but perhaps in some small way, it would pave the way for healing, for both her and myself. In that quiet, I silently vowed to face whatever came next, armed not with lies but with the brutal truth. I knew that the path ahead would be treacherous, filled with pain and doubt. Still, I was tired of hiding in shadows. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to be truly seen, not as the manipulator I had pretended to be, but as a flawed man desperate to find his way back to the light. I never imagined that my words, carefully chosen and calculated, could ignite such a savage reaction in Marcus. His face twisted into a grotesque caricature of laughter, eyes gleaming with a cruel, almost predatory gleam. The sound of it grates against my ears, a jagged echo that reverberates long after the laughter fades into a chilling silence. I sit there, feeling the weight of his gaze, a mixture of rage and mockery swirling around his smirk, as if he's just uncovered my most secret weakness. Except, in reality, I had fed him a lie, a carefully spun web of deception. "Ha!" he finally hisses between fits of laughter, voice dripping with contempt. "You really thought you could fool me, didn't you?" The way he says it makes my stomach churn. I want to say something, to defend myself, but all I can do is watch him. The realization sinking in that I've unleashed a monster bigger than I ever anticipated. His laughter subsides into a low, sinister chuckle, and then he rises slowly, pacing in front of me as if he's savoring his victory. "You played your little game so well," he sneers, voice sharp with mock admiration. "Creating a disorder that doesn't exist. Brilliant, really. You thought you could manipulate the situation, bend everyone to your will just like you did with your little lies. But I see it now, you're the puppet master, aren't you?" I feel the blood drain from my face, the enormity of what I've done crashing over me like a tidal wave. I had convinced myself that the fiction was necessary, a tool to trap the killer, to turn him against his own conscience. Yet standing here I realized that I had created a creature far more dangerous than I anticipated, an entity born from my own desperation, my need for control. I thought I was steering the ship, but I was merely fueling the fire that threatened to consume everything. Marcus's eyes bore into mine with a feral intensity. "You think you're clever," he continues, voice icy, "but all you've done is make yourself a bigger target. Your little so-called truth, it's just another lie in a long chain of deceptions. You've become a master manipulator, a puppeteer hiding behind a mask of virtue. And now look at what you've truly created." His smile is derisive, full of contempt, as if he's just discovered a new, cruel truth about me. I try to speak, to explain, but the words catch in my throat. My mind races for a way out, some fragment of clarity amid the chaos I helped foster. I had envisioned myself as the savior, the one who could pierce through the darkness with honesty. Instead, I had become the architect of chaos, a creator of illusions that had spun out of control. My attempt to manipulate the killer's mind, to implant a false disorder to throw him off balance, has backfired spectacularly. I see now that I was playing with fire and I have been burned by my own hand. Marcus steps closer, his face inches from mine. "You're not a healer," he whispers venomously. "You're a fraud, a con artist who hides behind a facade of morality. And the worst part? You believed your own lie." His words cut deeper than any physical blow, each syllable a dagger twisting in my chest. I realize with sickening clarity that I have become what I despise, a manipulator disguised as a savior, wielding deception as my weapon. My creation of the non-existent disorder was never about justice or protecting the innocent. It was about controlling the chaos I couldn't tame otherwise, about feeling powerful in a world that had long since left me feeling helpless. His laughter finally subsides, replaced by a cold, deadly silence. I see the predator behind his eyes now, a reflection of my own dark ambitions. I have created a monster, one that no longer needs my lies to thrive. It's grown beyond my grasp, feeding off my sins, infecting everything I hold dear. As I sit there, trembling beneath his gaze, I understand that my manipulation, once a tool in my arsenal, has now become my undoing. I had thought I was guiding the storm, bending it to my will, but in truth I was riding the wave of my own destruction. Marcus's brutal reaction has shattered the illusion that I was in control. In that moment I see the terrible truth. I am not the master of this game. I'm merely a pawn, caught in a larger, darker game I helped craft. And as the realization sinks in, I feel an odd sense of relief, a fleeting hope that perhaps this chaos, this destruction, might be the catalyst for something new, a chance to rebuild from the ruins of my own making. But first I must confront the monster I've become, stare into the abyss that I once thought I could manipulate, and accept that the line between healer and villain was blurred long ago, and that I crossed it willingly. I close my eyes and the familiar, haunting image floods back. It's as if I've been transported to that night again, reliving every agonizing second with an intensity that never seems to fade. My mother's face, pale and trembling, etched into my mind like a fractured mirror reflecting the chaos I helped ignite. I remember the way her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything to hold on to. Even as I watched her slip further into the abyss I'd created, I didn't set out to kill her, not physically at least. But in that moment I realize I was killing her piece by piece with words, with lies, with the cruel illusion of a disorder I manufactured just to protect my secret. I had convinced myself that this elaborate deception was for her own good, that if I could just control her unraveling mind, I could save her from the pain I knew lurked beneath her fragile veneer. Yet as I sit here, trembling, haunted, I see how wrong I was. The clinical part of me had always believed in the power of understanding, in the sanctity of the correct diagnosis, of the right treatment. But that night my mind had spun a web so intricate that I couldn't tell where I ended and the deception began. I crafted the disorder in secret, drawing from the darkest corners of my knowledge and my own suppressed fears. It was a game of shadows, a way to hide my failures and fears behind a veneer of professionalism. I told myself it was a necessary evil, a shield against the chaos that threatened to consume us both. But deep down I knew I was playing God, twisting her reality, manipulating her perception of herself and her pain. I can still feel the sick thrill of control, the rush of power I got when she believed the lie. Say it was intoxicating, addictive even. I watched her mind fracture piece by piece as her grip on reality slipped through my fingers. I justified it all, telling myself I was helping her, that I was doing what no one else could. But beneath that rationalization lurked a dark, unspoken truth. I wanted to matter. I wanted to be the one who understood, who fixed, who had the answer. And in my desperation, I created a monster that I could no longer contain. Now as I replay the scene in my mind, I see her eyes, her desperate, shimmering eyes, as the last shreds of her sanity fell away. I remember the cold silence that followed her collapse, the heavy weight of guilt pressing down on me like an iron trap. That night I crossed a boundary I told myself I never would. I became both the healer and the villain, a puppeteer manipulating the fragile threads of her mind, while desperately trying to convince myself I was the only one who could save her. All these years, I clung to the illusion that I was in control, that my expertise, my knowledge, could somehow rewrite the chaos into order, but that night shattered everything. The chaos I had built, bit by bit, had turned into a storm I couldn't control. The disease I invented was never real. It was a reflection of my own fractured psyche, a mirror of my desperation and my hubris. As I sit in the silence that follows that memory, I feel the ghost of her presence lingering in the room. I see her, trembling, broken, and I wonder if I ever truly saw her at all, or if I was blinded by my own obsession to fix what was unfixable. The lines between my duty as a doctor and my sins as a manipulator blurred long before that night, and now I realize that I crossed them willingly, seduced by the illusion of power. In that darkness, I find a strange comfort, an understanding, that my actions, no matter how catastrophic, are part of a larger, darker tapestry I helped weave. Perhaps I deserved the chaos that followed, the pain that now haunts me, because in creating that lie, I also created my own undoing. The death of my mother was the ultimate manifestation of my failure, not just as her daughter, but as the person I thought I was. A healer, a protector. Instead, I became the architect of her destruction, blinded by my arrogance and my need for control. And now I stand at the precipice of realization that I am no longer the healer I once believed myself to be. I am a creator of chaos, a manipulator of shadows, and perhaps most frightening of all, I am the monster I once tried to cure. The pain, the guilt, the regret, they all mingle into a relentless tide that threatens to drown me. Yet beneath it all, I know this is only the beginning. I must confront the ghost of that night, face the truth of what I did, and accept that in my attempt to save her, I might have doomed us both. I clutch the battered USB drive in my trembling hand, the weight of my secrets pressing heavily into my palm. This is the final act in a long, spiraling dance of lies and revelations. I know that handing over these recordings, my voice echoing truths and falsehoods, will shatter everything. Yet I feel an odd sense of relief, as if releasing this burden might finally free me from the relentless grip of my own guilt. I remember the night I first conceived this deception. It was born from desperation, a desperate grasp at control when everything else seemed to slip through my fingers. I felt the thrill of constructing a new reality, one where I, as the healer, could shape the fractured pieces of her mind into something manageable. It was intoxicating. In those moments, I believed I was doing right, saving her from her torment, guiding her out of chaos. But as I look back now, I see only the shambles of that illusion, a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. My mind races through the sequences of that night, each detail etched painfully into my memory. I remember the trembling of her voice, the way her eyes darted around the room, seeking something I could not see. I remember how I sat there, a calm veneer masking the tempest of my own making. I had fabricated the diagnosis, an invented disorder that would justify my manipulations, that would give me the power to steer her recovery. It was a lie I told myself was for her sake, but in truth, it was for mine. It made me feel in control, superior even. Now the consequences are undeniable. The moment I pressed send on those recordings, a Pandora's box was unleashed. The truth, or at least my version of it, spilled into the world like a flood. I watched her unravel in ways I never anticipated. Her fragile mind unable to contain the chaos I'd unwittingly unleashed. I saw her slip further away, her reality dissolving like sugar in hot water. That was the night I realized I had become both the creator and destroyer of her fragile peace. What haunts me most is the knowledge that my deception, not just the diagnosis but everything I fabricated, was rooted in my desperate need to control the uncontrollable. I thought I was saving her, but I see now that I was only digging her grave deeper. I manipulated her pain, turned her suffering into a tool for my own ego. I convinced myself that my actions were justified, that I was doing what was necessary to help her, but in doing so, I made her a prisoner of my own dark ambitions. And yet, even as I accept the devastating truth, I can't help but question my own sanity. Did I truly believe I was helping, or was I simply too afraid to confront the chaos within myself? The line between healer and monster blurred long ago, and I am left to wander the ruins of my conscience, trying to piece together what remains of the person I once was. Now, with trembling fingers, I prepare to deliver my notes and recordings to someone from my past, someone I hope will understand, or at least see the darkness I have become. I know that this act could obliterate the fragile peace I cling to, shattering the last remnants of my carefully constructed facade. But I am beyond caring about my reputation or my sanity. All that matters now is unburdening myself, exposing the truth that I have buried beneath layers of lies and guilt. As I seal the envelope containing everything, the recordings that whisper my sins, the notes that record my descent, I feel a strange sense of finality. It's as if I am releasing a demon from my own chest, freeing myself from the chains of deception. Yet beneath that relief, a cold dread persists. I wonder if, in revealing the truth, I am also inviting my own undoing. I am painfully aware that this act might be my last act of redemption, or my final descent into madness. Either way, I cannot turn back now. The web of lies I spun has grown too thick, and I find myself trapped within it, desperately trying to find a way out. But perhaps in this moment, the only way forward is through the chaos I created, the chaos I now must accept as my own reflection. As I press send, I feel the cold certainty that I am no longer the healer I once aspired to be. I am something darker, something born from my own desperation, my own hubris. And whether this act will lead to salvation or ruin, I know I have no choice but to face the consequences. The truth is out there now, waiting to consume everything I hold dear, including whatever shred of sanity I cling to. In the end, I realize that I have become my own ghost, haunting the remnants of a life built on deception. And as the screen flickers with the confirmation of my transmission, I am left in the silent aftermath, contemplating what remains, what will be lost, and whether I can ever truly undo what I have done. I sit alone in the dim glow of my office, the silence pressing heavily against my ears. The air feels thick, weighted with the ghosts of my own making. In that moment, I am forced to confront the reality I've long denied. My obsession with control was nothing but an illusion, a fragile veneer that cracked the moment I dared to create a lie, so convincing, so delicately constructed, that it became a part of her fractured reality. I never intended to deceive her, not truly, but the moment I fabricated that non-existent disorder, I felt an almost intoxicating surge of power. It was as if, by crafting that delicate falsehood, I had gained mastery over her unraveling mind, over the chaos that had consumed her long before I entered the picture. I watched her trembling, vulnerable, and I knew I had become something more than a healer. I had become a manipulator, an architect of illusions. My mind drifts back to that night, the way her trembling hands clutched at her head as I watched her struggle to hold on to reality. I saw the cracks in her psyche deepen, heard the silent scream within her. In that oppressive darkness, I felt myself slipping into a darker place, an intoxicating mix of power and guilt. I told myself I was helping her, that I was guiding her through her pain, but beneath that justification lurked an unsettling truth. I was controlling her pain, bending her suffering to my will. In the shadows of my office, I had created a maze, a labyrinth of truth and deception, each turn carefully designed to manipulate her perceptions. I often wonder if I was truly a healer, or if I had become something else entirely, something unrecognizable, even to myself. Perhaps I was both, intertwined in a dance of salvation and destruction. The line blurred, and I reveled in the chaos I had sown, convinced that mastery over her madness meant mastery over myself. Yet beneath the surface of that controlling facade, I felt a gnawing emptiness. The power I drew from her vulnerability was fleeting, an illusion that masked my own fears and failures. I realized in that solitude that my relentless pursuit of control was a desperate attempt to deny my own vulnerabilities, the trembling cracks in my own psyche that I refused to face. I had convinced myself that by shaping her reality, I was helping her heal. But now, as I sit here, I recognize the truth. I was only building my own prison. The more I manipulated her, the more I trapped myself within a web of lies. The illusion of mastery was just that, a fragile illusion. And now I am left to acknowledge the bitter irony. The very act that gave me a semblance of power was the act that sealed my downfall. There's a strange comfort in this recognition, even as it stings. Accepting my vulnerability feels like tearing off a mask I've worn for so long, exposing the raw, trembling core of who I am. I see now that true liberation only comes when I stop fighting the chaos within me, when I embrace my imperfections instead of hiding behind my illusions of control. The room feels colder, emptier. I realize that all my efforts to manipulate circumstances, to craft a perfect narrative, were merely distractions from my own inadequacies. I want to believe that by exposing my own flaws, I can somehow find peace, perhaps even redemption. But I know this process is painful, that it requires me to surrender the illusion of certainty I cling to so desperately. As I breathe in deeply, I understand that I must accept my fallibility, that true strength lies not in control, but in vulnerability. Only by letting go of the reins, by acknowledging my faults and embracing the chaos inherent in my nature, can I hope to find some measure of peace. And so, I sit here in the aftermath of my own revelation, contemplating what it means to truly be free. The power I once felt was an illusion, a fleeting shadow cast by my own fears. But now I realize that real freedom resides in acceptance, accepting myself with all my cracks, my imperfections, my failures. Perhaps this is my only true salvation, to stop pretending I can steer the course of everything around me, to stop hiding behind the masks of strength and control. The truth is, I am vulnerable, more than I've ever admitted. And in that vulnerability, I find the faint glimmer of something real. Maybe, just maybe, the path to peace begins here in embracing my own fragility. And as I sit in this silence, I know I must choose to walk it, willingly, openly, without fear. To accept that I am no longer the architect of my own salvation, but a humble traveler in a world of chaos I once tried to dominate. Only then can I begin to truly heal, not just her, but myself as well. I never intended to deceive her, not truly. The plan was born out of a desperate need, an obsession perhaps, to grasp some semblance of control in a world that had long since slipped from my fingers. When I first conceived the idea of fabricating that non-existent disorder, I felt a rush, a surge of power that was intoxicating and frightening all at once. It was as if, by creating this fragile illusion, I could manipulate her fractured mind, bend her perception to my will, and in doing so, silence some of the chaos that haunted her every waking moment. In the dim glow of my office, I watched her. Her face, usually so guarded, now contorted in confusion and fear. I saw the cracks deepen in her veneer, her fragile defenses tumbling down like a house of cards. It was strange, almost surreal, to observe the unraveling, knowing I was the cause. My darkness seeped into every lie I spun, coloring each word with a sinister intent I couldn't entirely deny. I convinced myself that I was helping her, that this was a necessary evil, that her suffering could be alleviated by understanding her real condition, something I'd conjured from thin air. But as the night stretched long and silent, I began to realize something darker stirring within me. I was no longer just a healer. I was a manipulator, a puppet master hiding behind the guise of a professional. The boundaries blurred, and I found myself lost in a maze of truth and deception, where the lines between right and wrong became increasingly indistinct. Every session, every lie, reinforced this insidious realization. I was shaping her reality, but in doing so, I was also shaping my own descent into a moral abyss. The moment of clarity hit me like a thunderclap. Watching her crumble under the weight of a lie I crafted, I felt a profound shame, an ache deep in my chest as if I had betrayed both her and myself. The power I wielded was a hollow victory. It was not salvation, but destruction masquerading as salvation. I had created a monster. Her dependency on my fabricated diagnosis had transformed her into a shell of a person, lost in the labyrinth of my lies. And yet I had also lost myself in the process. The lines between who I was and who I pretended to be had begun to dissolve. Now, standing at this precipice, I realize I can't undo what I've done, but I can lay it bare. I have decided to expose everything, every lie, every manipulation, every moment I used her vulnerability to serve my own hidden motives. I am prepared for the fallout, for the shame and the judgment that will surely follow, because only through this act of brutal honesty can I confront my guilt and face the mirror I've avoided for so long. In doing so, I am risking everything, the respect of my profession, my reputation, possibly even my freedom. Yet I see no other way. Silence has become unbearable, a prison of my own making. I long to unmask the truth, to no longer hide behind the facade of the caring psychologist, but to stand exposed, raw, and unshielded. I want to confront the part of me that thought power could be wielded without consequence, that control could bring peace. The truth is, I was wrong. Everything I believed was a lie. As I prepare to speak out, I feel a strange sense of liberation. The weight of guilt presses heavily on my shoulders, yet there's also a strange lightness in unburdening myself. I understand now that true redemption comes not from hiding or denying, but from owning every mistake, every shadow within me. I've spent so long trying to shape her reality, to mold her suffering into a controlled narrative, that I forgot my own. Perhaps this is my moment of reckoning, the act that will finally set me free. I am ready to face the consequences. To be honest, I must finally confront my own darkness, to accept that I am both healer and destroyer, and that healing begins only when I admit to my flaws. The truth will ripple outward, and maybe, just maybe, in exposing my own sins, I can finally find some measure of peace, an ending to this chapter that has haunted me for so long. For in the raw honesty of this act, I hope to discover a sliver of redemption, a faint whisper of something genuinely real in a life built on layers of lies. As I close the door behind me, a shiver runs down my spine, not from cold but from the weight of what I've just confessed. The air feels heavier, thick with unspoken truths that I've kept buried for so long. I stand there, trembling slightly, knowing that my words have shattered the fragile veneer I carefully constructed around my career, my conscience, and my very identity. I had thought that revealing my deception would be my undoing, but strangely, it feels like the only way forward now. Looking ahead, I see a landscape fraught with uncertainty. The future stretches before me, a vast expanse of possibilities, some terrifying, some quietly hopeful. I am haunted by the realization that the biggest lie I ever told wasn't the fabricated disorder, but the one I told myself, that I was in control, that I could manipulate pain and suffering without consequence. That illusion was my fortress, my sanctuary, but now it crumbles around me, revealing the raw, vulnerable core I tried so desperately to hide. I think of her, her fractured face, her trembling hands, the way she clung to every word I spun like a lifeline. I created her suffering, sculpted her chaos into a controlled narrative so that I could feel powerful. The sensation was intoxicating, addictive even. I convinced myself that I was helping her, guiding her through her darkness, when in reality I was anchoring her deeper into her despair. My hands, once perceived as gentle and healing, had become agents of manipulation, forging a false reality in her mind that suited my need for control. Now that the truth is out, I am flooded with conflicting emotions: regret, relief, fear, and a strange sense of liberation. There's a brutal honesty in exposing myself, in acknowledging that I am both the architect of her suffering and the one who could have prevented it. I see that I built a house of lies brick by brick, each deception a testament to my own insecurities, my craving for dominance in a world that felt unpredictable and uncontrollable. I used her vulnerability as a tool, a means to elevate my ego while hiding my own weaknesses. As I stand here, I realize that the road to redemption won't be paved with easy answers. There will be repercussions, legal, moral, personal. I've betrayed the very oath I swore, betrayed her trust in ways I can't undo. Yet in a strange paradox, I feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps the only way to truly heal is to admit my own wounds first, to confront the darkness within me that led to this betrayal. So it's frightening to think I might lose everything: the respect of my peers, my reputation, even my freedom. But I know that these losses are the price of honesty now. I am acutely aware that silence would be easier, a way to escape the shame and the fallout. But silence is a prison, and I am tired of being its prisoner. I want to face what I have done. I want to own it fully. Only by doing so can I begin to understand the depths of my own depravity, and perhaps find a sliver of redemption. I am no longer that man who believed in control and manipulation. I am someone who recognizes the terrible harm I've caused. Gazing into the future, I see the scars of my actions, the many lives I've affected, the broken trust I can never fully repair. I accept that some damage is irreversible, but I also see the possibility of atonement, however small, in my willingness to confront my sins. The truth has set something in motion, a reckoning that I can't ignore anymore. In my heart, I know that I must stand accountable, no matter how painful it might be. To truly be free, I must shed the false layers I've cloaked myself in, layers of arrogance, deception, and denial. I must face the reality that I am not a healer, nor a savior, but a deeply flawed human being capable of both compassion and cruelty. The future is uncertain, yes, and fraught with consequences I cannot yet comprehend, but I am resolved. My journey toward redemption begins with this confession, with this raw exposure of the truths I had long refused to face. There's a strange calm now, born from the chaos of my revelations. I accept that I may never fully escape the shadows of my past, but I can choose to walk through the darkness towards something that resembles honesty. Perhaps in that honesty, I can find a way to forgive myself, to accept that I am fundamentally imperfect, and that even in my worst moments, I still have the capacity for change. The road ahead is daunting, yet I take my first step with open eyes and a tentative hope that someday I might find peace in the shattered pieces of my own making,